Let's go ahead and cleanse our palates a little bit. Let's touch base with Alex in Florida. Alex, what can we do for you today?
Hi. I was calling because I was wondering, do either of y'all know if there's any truth to the idea that in the Stone Age that men were hunters, women were gatherers, or that whole kind of thing?
Yeah, it's way more complex than what you're describing, and I think we see that not just quote in the Stone Age, but in a number of modern cultures. It is actually still very true that a number of not technologically advanced tribes who are living in very traditional ways, that a number of indigenous folks do still have things semi divided up in a certain sense. But this notion that you're a hunter or you're a gatherer, like you show up for work in the morning and they hand you your protective personal equipment and then you go out and do your assigned job, is not really what we see in those types of anthropological settings. What kind of questions did you have though? Where was this maybe going?
So I was going to. I've heard that kind of line of reasoning be used to kind of justify the idea of like stay-at-home moms, as it were.
Mm.
Um, like the men being the breadwinner kind of thing. And I was going to see if you lent any credence to that kind of argument.
I can
Yeah,
speak to that a little bit.
please.
Um, so yeah, the idea of hunter gatherer is not men hunters, women gatherers. It's one society hunter gatherer, right? So men could be hunters and gatherers, whereas women wouldn't necessarily be hunters. And we saw that, kind of the oldest evidence we have. We saw societies, most societies, based on that, and it wasn't because women were gatherers. It was because they were at home with children, child rearing. They had to feed them, right? A man can't necessarily bring a child out, for the day and not be able to feed them unless they had a woman with them, of course. But the way that those societies were kind of structured, and yes, we do think that that was the birth of gender roles. To get back to your original question, where you have women kind of in the domesticated side of things, and men out forming hunting parties and establishing hierarchies. The stronger of the men, or the one with the title, kind of creating the rules and dictating the way things are going to go. So that is, generally speaking, of course, Christy's right to say that that is much more nuanced, because that is not a formula for every single society. But from what we can tell, just anthropologically and historically speaking, that is typically what we find, that gender roles probably came out of the division between the domestic side of things and then in the hunter side of things, where men were in hunting parties. So how we looking so far, Alex or Christy? Do you have something you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, Alex, I'll let you jump in. I can certainly say a lot more, but this conversation can go a million places, really.
Yeah. I don't really have anywhere else I was going with that. I was just
Sure.
genuinely curious about that, and I figured that y'all would have a good idea, especially talking about uh, it's not. I know you guys aren't specifically talking about gender roles and the origin, but it is kind of related to the same-sex adoption kind of thing that y'all wanted
Yeah.
to talk about today.
No,
So
it's
I figured
it's an
I'd call
interesting
in and ask.
question. Yeah, I so there's an excellent book I might encourage people who are curious to check out that's related to this idea, called Different by Franz de Waal, who is a famous primatologist. And he talks about gender sort of through that lens of biology, of the sexual differentiation, and comes to some really interesting conclusions. That comment that I mentioned earlier about male primates raising children being something that we have witnessed out in the wild comes from that book. And it can maybe do a lot to open your eyes about some of these ideas. I think it's important to recognize that when we talk about men doing this and women doing that, particularly in terms of like career or their job, their role in society, that there's going to be not thick lines. There's going to be a lot of differentiation, but also just because men hunt and women gather, even if we were going to label it that way, it's not with the same type of prestige that I think that we might imagine it from like our American or just more modern Western lenses. This notion that men go out to do the hard work while women do sort of the boring housework is based on the assumption that it's like very prestigious to be a hunter, and to be a gatherer is somehow looked down upon. And I don't know that you really see that universally or even commonly across cultures. Really, whatever has been our history as a species, none of this really suggests what our capacities are or what our moral philosophy ought to be.
Well
We're
said.
allowed to do what we want to do, and whether or not one gender or one sex is particularly better at another task or not, better suited to another task or not, doesn't say anything about what one particular individual should be allowed to do, or what we want to encourage people to consider when they're looking at their career, when they're looking at their future, least of all in a modern world where the ability to go out and hunt has very little with the ability to like write software, or the ability to understand sophisticated statistical analysis. And all of these things that we now think of as jobs are so disconnected from that hunter gatherer dichotomy, that to try and apply some sort of male female dichotomy is just stacking messy, loosely conflated data on top of each other.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I'm definitely hearing what you're saying, and honestly, I agree with the conclusions. I just am, like I said, unfamiliar with a lot of the reasoning that goes into it.
Let me.
Oh gosh, I forget which one. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, please finish your thought.
I thought one. Yeah. I forget which one of you guys recommended the book Different, but I'm definitely going to go check that one out. I appreciate your time today. Unless you guys have any other thoughts to add.
I do. I just want to kind of shed some light on this idea of hunter-gatherer stuff. So Christy's absolutely right. So let's say, being a woman doesn't necessarily make you not capable of hunting, right? It just so happened that at that time, women were not taking children out to hunt. The men were free to kind of do that. There is a difference, though, between hunter-gatherer society and then the domestication of plants and animals, right? And once that happened, then we started to see this kind of conflation of gender roles. No longer did the men have to go out and hunt, and people's roles could start actually blending together, right? And so I want you to leave on this note. When we talk about our capabilities, where we come from versus where we are now. When I was doing my my master's, I did a capstone project on the development of gender roles and how actually religion has served to prop up gender roles where they're actually starting to dissipate. And what I found was that the world's strongest economies, this is kind of a product of that, but the world's strongest economies have higher levels of women in the workforce, right? So countries where you have like 30% of women working typically have a poorer economy, where in the United States, we have about 66 to 67% of our female population working, and we have the second biggest, if not first biggest economy, depending on how you judge that. And so there is something to say about having women and men kind of both contributing in equal capacities. And so I kind of wanted to just posit that on you before we moved on, and see what you thought about that.
Oh no. So I definitely agree with that. That the best way to kind of organize economies is for everybody to contribute to the workload. And with what I believe it was Christy mentioned earlier, that there really isn't like a specific thing that you're better at based on your gender. And that really what all this boils down to is that just having a balanced workload is really what it comes down to, and that is what really helps everybody involved in the situation.
Yeah, no, I think that that's fair to say. It's unfortunate that we are currently living in a society where one gender has been in many, many, many ways dominated by another because of a lot of bullshit science. And I think a lot of people would try to point to a half understood representation of anthropology as some of that bullshit science. So I don't know that we are all called to become anthropologists or that we all need to be experts in like neo-humans or any of these ideas, but it's important to not be thrown off by some of this rhetoric. And so I really appreciate you raising all of these points. I do think that that's a great book for you to check out. I might also encourage you to consider Sex at Dawn by Christopher Ryan. But in any case, take a look, see what you find, and then maybe give us a call back.